The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves across the Texas plains as Nathan Cross waited on the platform of Cedar Junction Station, his worn hat pulled low against the setting sun. It was October 1882, and he was about to marry a woman he had never met, for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. At 31, Nathan owned one of the largest spreads in the county, but that was about to change unless he could produce a wife within the next 2 weeks. His late uncle's will had been crystal clear. The nephew who inherited the Cross Ranch must be married and settled down, or the property would be sold and the proceeds donated to charity. Nathan's cousin Jeremiah had already lost his chance by failing to find a bride in time, leaving Nathan as the last hope for keeping the ranch in the family. The advertisement Nathan had placed in the eastern newspapers had been brutally honest about his situation. He needed a wife quickly, could offer security and a comfortable home, but made no promises about love or romance. To his surprise, he had received nearly 24 responses, but only one had seemed practical and forthright enough to suit his needs. Miss Victoria Whitmore had written that she was 28, well-educated, and seeking a marriage of mutual benefit rather than romantic attachment. She claimed to be skilled in household management and comfortable with frontier life, having grown up on a farm in Pennsylvania before teaching school for several years. Most importantly, she had stated clearly that she understood the practical nature of their arrangement and harbored no illusions about marrying for love. Now, as the afternoon train pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and shriek of brakes, Nathan felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. He had been honest about his own circumstances in his letters, but he wondered if Victoria Whitmore had been equally truthful about hers. The first passengers to disembark were clearly traveling through rather than stopping. A businessman in an expensive suit, an elderly couple heading west to visit family, and a young man who looked like he might be a drummer selling goods from town to town. Nathan began to worry that his intended bride had missed the train or changed her mind about their arrangement. Then he saw her, stepping down from the car with the careful grace of someone, managing long skirts and a heavy traveling bag. Victoria Whitmore was not what Nathan had expected, though he realized he had never formed a clear picture of her appearance from her letters. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5 feet 7 inches, with a robust figure that spoke of good health and strength rather than delicate femininity. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her blue eyes held intelligence and determination as she scanned the platform. When their eyes met, Nathan felt a jolt of something he hadn't anticipated. Not attraction exactly, but a sense of recognition, as if he was looking at someone who could match his own strength and determination. Victoria approached him with confident steps, extending her hand in greeting. "Mr. Cross, I presume?" she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested good breeding and education. "Miss Whitmore," Nathan replied, shaking her offered hand and noting the firmness of her grip. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." "Long but manageable," Victoria said, studying his face with the same frank assessment he was giving her. "You look exactly as I imagined from your letters." Nathan wasn't sure if that was a compliment or merely an observation, but something about her directness put him at ease. "I have a wagon waiting. We can discuss the final arrangements on the way to town." As they loaded Victoria's trunk and traveled toward Cedar Junction, Nathan found himself stealing glances at his intended bride. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded calmly in her lap, showing no signs of nervousness or second thoughts about the unusual situation they were entering into. "Mr. Cross," Victoria said as they approached the outskirts of town, "I believe we should be completely honest with each other before we proceed with this marriage." Nathan felt a flicker of concern. "What do you mean?" "I mean that there are things about my background that I haven't shared in my letters. Not deceptions exactly, but omissions that you should know about before you commit to marrying me." Nathan brought the wagon to a stop beside a grove of oak trees, giving them privacy for what promised to be an important conversation. "I'm listening." Victoria took a deep breath, clearly gathering her courage. "Mr. Cross, I was not entirely truthful about my reasons for seeking a marriage arrangement. Yes, I am 28 and educated, and yes, I am comfortable with frontier life. But I didn't mention that I own property of my own back in Pennsylvania. Nathan stared at her, confused. Property. A farm that my father left me when he died 2 years ago. It's not large, but it's profitable, and it provides me with an independent income. Victoria met his eyes directly. I didn't come west because I needed a husband to support me. Mr. Cross, I came because I was curious about Texas and because your advertisement suggested you were a practical man who wouldn't expect me to pretend to be something I'm not. I don't understand, Nathan said slowly. If you have your own property and income, why did you answer my advertisement? Victoria smiled, and the expression transformed her serious face completely. Because I've discovered that most men are intimidated by a woman who owns land and makes her own decisions. Your letters suggested you might be different. You seem to want a partner rather than a dependent. Nathan processed this information, trying to understand how it changed their arrangement. So you could leave at any time. Return to Pennsylvania and your farm. Yes, Victoria said simply. Which means that if I stay and marry you, it will be because I choose to, not because I have no other options. Something about her honesty struck Nathan as both refreshing and slightly terrifying. He had expected to marry a woman who needed his protection and support, not someone who was his equal in independence and resources. Is there anything else you haven't told me? He asked. Victoria hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. There is one more thing. I may be more unconventional than you expected. I have opinions about politics and business. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't always behave the way society expects ladies to behave. What do you mean by that? I mean that I helped my father run our farm from the time I was 12 years old. I can handle livestock, manage accounts, and make decisions about crops and markets. I also believe women should have the right to vote and own property in their own names. Victoria paused, watching his reaction carefully. If you're looking for a decorative wife who will keep house and defer to your judgment in all things, I'm not the right woman for you. Nathan found himself smiling despite the seriousness of their conversation. Miss Whitmore, I think you may have misunderstood something about my situation. What's that? I don't need a decorative wife. I need a partner who can help me save my ranch and build something lasting. If you can handle livestock and manage accounts, you're exactly what I've been hoping for. Victoria looked surprised by his response. You don't mind that I'm not conventional? I mind that you thought I might, Nathan said honestly. The kind of man who would be threatened by a strong, capable woman is not the kind of man who could build and maintain a ranch in Texas. I need someone who can stand beside me as an equal, not someone who needs to be protected from life's realities. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the town's small church, with the preacher's wife and the hotel clerk serving as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress of deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, and Nathan wore his best suit, which had been his father's before him. But it was after the ceremony, during the reception that the townspeople had organized, that Nathan began to understand just how much Victoria was going to surprise him. Mrs. Cross, said banker William Morrison, approaching them with the calculating look of a man who smelled opportunity. I suppose now that you're married, your husband will be taking over the management of your affairs. Victoria raised an eyebrow at the presumption. Actually, Mr. Morrison, my husband and I will be managing our combined affairs together. I believe in partnership rather than one-sided control. But surely, Morrison persisted, a woman can't be expected to understand the complexities of business and finance. Can't she? Victoria asked mildly. How interesting. I've been managing the finances of a 200-acre farm for the past 2 years, including all crop sales, livestock purchases, and equipment investments. I've increased the farm's profitability by 30% during that time. What specifically about business and finance do you think I might not understand? Nathan watched in fascination as the banker fumbled for a response, clearly having expected the new Mrs. Cross to be a more conventional frontier wife. Other conversations around them had quieted as people overheard the exchange. Well, I just meant that is to say, Morrison stammered. I think what Mr. Morrison meant, Nathan interjected smoothly. is that he's looking forward to working with both of us as we expand our operations. Isn't that right, Morrison? The banker nodded quickly, clearly eager to escape the conversation. Of course, of course. Welcome to Cedar Junction, Mrs. Cross. As Morrison retreated, Nathan turned to Victoria with newfound respect. That was expertly handled. I've had practice, Victoria said with a slight smile. You'd be amazed how many men assume that owning property makes me an anomaly of nature. The real surprises, however, were yet to come. Over the following weeks, as Victoria settled into life at the Cross Ranch, Nathan discovered that her claims about her capabilities had been, if anything, understated. She proved to have an intuitive understanding of cattle that impressed even his most experienced hands. She could spot a sick animal from across a pasture, knew how to calculate the optimal time for breeding, and had ideas about improving the ranch's water management that Nathan had never considered. Where did you learn so much about cattle? Nathan asked one evening after Victoria had diagnosed a problem with one of their prize bulls that had escaped Nathan's notice entirely. My father raised dairy cattle along with crops, Victoria explained, settling into the chair across from his at their kitchen table. Different breeds, same basic principles. Animals are animals, whether you're raising them for milk or beef. And the water management ideas. Common sense, mostly. Water flows downhill, and Texas has a lot of dry spells. If you're going to survive here long-term, you need to think about conservation and storage. Victoria paused, studying his face. Does it bother you that I notice these things? Nathan considered the question seriously. It bothers me that I didn't notice them first, he admitted. But I'd rather have a wife who makes me a better rancher than one who makes me feel superior while everything falls apart around us. Victoria's most shocking revelation came 6 weeks into their marriage, when a neighboring rancher named Jake Morrison, the banker's brother, stopped by to discuss a boundary dispute that had been simmering for months. Now that you're settled, Cross, Morrison said, settling into a chair in their front parlor, we need to talk about that water rights issue. My cattle need access to Willow Creek, and your fence is blocking the traditional path. Nathan had been dreading this conversation. Morrison was known for his aggressive tactics and his belief that might made right. The man owned twice as much land as Nathan, and had the political connections to make life difficult for anyone who opposed him. Jake, Nathan began carefully, that creek runs through my property. I'm willing to discuss reasonable access arrangements, but I can't just let your cattle wander through my pastures at will. Morrison's face darkened. Cross, you're new to this area. You don't understand how things work around here. That path has been used by cattle for 20 years, long before you inherited this place. But not legally, Victoria said quietly from where she sat near the window, apparently focused on her sewing. Both men turned to look at her in surprise. Morrison seemed affronted that a woman had spoken during what he clearly considered a man's conversation. I beg your pardon, ma'am, Morrison said with exaggerated courtesy. But this is a matter of business between your husband and myself. Victoria set down her sewing and looked at Morrison with cool assessment. Mr. Morrison, you claim that your cattle have used that path for 20 years. Do you have any documentation of an easement or water rights agreement with the previous owner? Morrison sputtered. Documentation? I don't need documentation. It's tradition, common usage. Common usage without documentation is called trespassing, Victoria interrupted calmly. At least that's what it's called in Pennsylvania, and I believe Texas law is similar on that point. She stood and moved to the desk in the corner of the room, returning with a folder of papers. I've been reviewing the property records since we arrived, and there's no mention of any water rights or easements granted to your property. In fact, the survey clearly shows that Willow Creek lies entirely within our boundaries. Nathan stared at his wife in amazement. He had been preparing for a difficult confrontation with Morrison, possibly even a legal battle, and Victoria had apparently been quietly researching the issue and preparing their defense. Furthermore, Victoria continued, spreading a hand-drawn map on the table, I've walked the entire boundary between our properties, and your current fence line actually extends approximately 50 yards onto our land in 3 separate locations. Morrison's face had gone from annoyed to alarmed. Now see here, Mrs. Cross, you can't just... I can just, Victoria said firmly. Mr. Morrison, I suggest you consult with a surveyor and adjust your fence lines to match the legal boundaries. As for water access, we're willing to discuss a formal easement agreement that would allow your cattle supervised access to the creek during specified hours, in exchange for appropriate compensation. Compensation, Morrison repeated weakly. Use of our land for your benefit, Victoria said. Surely you understand that such an arrangement would require payment of some kind? Nathan watched the entire exchange with growing admiration and amazement. In less than 10 minutes, Victoria had taken what he expected to be a losing battle and turned it into a negotiation from a position of strength. Morrison left shortly afterward, promising to consider their proposal, but clearly shaken by the encounter. When he was gone, Nathan turned to Victoria with something approaching awe. Where did that come from? Victoria returned to her chair and picked up her sewing as if nothing unusual had happened. What do you mean? I mean the legal research, the property survey, the negotiation strategy. You've been here 6 weeks, and you know more about our boundary issues than I do. Knowledge is power, Nathan, Victoria said matter-of-factly. I learned that from watching my father deal with neighbors who thought they could take advantage of a widowed farmer. The first thing you do when you acquire property is understand exactly what you own and what rights come with it. And the surveying. I walked the fence lines every morning while you were working the cattle. I noticed the discrepancies and checked them against the property maps at the courthouse. Victoria looked up from her sewing with a slight smile. Did you think I was just taking constitutional walks for my health? Nathan sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. Victoria, I owe you an apology. For what? For assuming that marrying you would be a simple business arrangement. For thinking I understood what I was getting into. He looked at her with new respect. You're not just helping me save the ranch. You're making it stronger than it's ever been. That was the idea, Victoria said calmly. Nathan, when I answered your advertisement, I wasn't looking for a husband who would support me. I was looking for a partner who would appreciate what I could contribute. Someone who wouldn't be threatened by a wife who could hold her own in business dealings. And if I had been threatened, then I would have returned to Pennsylvania and wished you well, Victoria said simply. Life is too short to spend it making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's insecurities. The months that followed proved Victoria's value beyond any doubt Nathan might have harbored. She negotiated better prices for their cattle sales, identified and resolved inefficiencies in their operations, and gradually became known throughout the county as a woman who could hold her own in any business discussion. But perhaps the most surprising discovery of all was how much Nathan found himself genuinely caring for his practical, unconventional wife. What had begun as a marriage of convenience was slowly transforming into something that felt very much like love. Victoria, he said one evening as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset, I need to tell you something. What's that? When I married you, I thought I was getting a housekeeper and a solution to my inheritance problem. Nathan reached over and took her hand. What I actually got was the strongest, most capable, most surprising woman I've ever met. And somehow, along the way, I fell in love with her. Victoria turned to look at him, her blue eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Nathan Cross. That may be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Even though it started as a business arrangement, especially because it started as a business arrangement, Victoria said softly. You fell in love with who I really am, not with some idealized version of femininity. That's the kind of love worth having. When Nathan kissed her, it was with the passion of a man who had discovered that the most profound surprises often came in practical packages, and that the strongest foundations for love were built on mutual respect, shared goals, and the daily choice to appreciate, rather than change the person you'd chosen to spend your life with. Their marriage became the standard in Cedar Junction for what a true partnership could look like, proving that the most shocking thing about Victoria Whitmore Cross was not her unconventional behavior, but her absolute refusal to apologize for being exactly who she was meant to be. If this story of unexpected partnership, mutual respect and love growing from equality rather than dependence touched your heart, Please share it with someone who might need to be reminded that the strongest relationships are built on appreciation for each other's unique strengths. Your support helps these stories reach others who may be learning to value themselves fully and seek partnerships that celebrate rather than diminish their capabilities. Thank you for believing in love stories that prove the most beautiful surprises often come from people who refuse to make themselves smaller to fit others' expectations.